Rock's Xebec is, even including Luffy, arguably the single most influential and important character in One Piece, and now that we've truly gotten to know him, what he looks like, everything that he's been up to, it's absolutely beyond me how incredibly cool this character is written, and how, like, Oda has created this literal lurking legend. I think we can say that Rox is the lurking legend that has secretly influenced all the big players that we know in the story. He influenced Roger, all the Yonko, even the Gorosei and Imu by pushing and forcing their hand. And so I just really wanted to make a long video talking about how cool this guy is, all the things that we know about him at this point, and why I believe he might be one of the all-time best characters in One Piece, but not just that, one of the best characters I have had the pleasure of getting to know in anime in recent history as well. And so I really want to take some time with you today and talk about things like, who is Rox actually more similar to, Blackbeard or Luffy? What about his insane crew, all of whom are incredibly important people to the story in some way, shape, or form, right? What are his powers? What about his relationship with Blackbeard? Is he Buggy's father? What about Loki, right? Rox's very mysterious history. Where did he come from? How did he know all these things? Why was he so powerful? What is his power? Then, of course, God Valley, like, what went on there? What was Rox's plan? What did he do there? Why was this one of the most important events in all of One Piece history? And then, of course, maybe the most interesting question of all, is he still alive? What are the possibilities for that idea? There is a lot I want to get into with you today. And so I kind of thought, instead of writing a script, I wanted to sit down with you and have a heart-to-heart talk one-on-one with you. And let's just start by talking about who is Rox actually more like right now. Is it more Blackbeard or is it more Luffy? Now, originally, I think we all kind of assumed that it would be Blackbeard, right? Blackbeard is the big antagonist to Luffy. They have all these similarities. They're two sides of the same coin, as we see when they meet in Jaya with the big pie eating, thing where they have their complete opposite views, but also Luffy and Blackbeard are dreamers. And then, of course, the first time we ever even get to hear about Rox Xebec from Garp and Sengoku, we get this impression that this is the worst guy to ever do it. He's just absolutely crazy, tried to take over the world, pure evil, had the strongest crew, was just wreaking havoc and needed to be stopped. That was the classic thing that we got told at the beginning. Things are now looking a little bit more nuanced, I would say. But now, after actually getting to know him a little bit more, I think he's really a lot more nuanced. We can ask the question, is Rox literally the same as Blackbeard? Is it Roger Rox, Blackbeard Luffy, right? Or could there be an argument that Rox might be a lot closer to what Luffy is doing, and is Black just kind of getting it a little bit wrong here? So let's take a look at this, right? I think one argument you could make for Rox is, as far as we can tell, he did, recruit most of the strong people into his crew through the Davy Back fights. And that does not exactly go hand in hand with what Luffy is doing, right? Luffy is more the type of person who befriends people, gains their trust, saves their life. I mean, Luffy's entire thing is that he saves people. He saves Zoro from being captured, saves Sanji, from, actually being stuck and not being able to follow his dreams, saves Nami, saves Usopp's village, and so on and so forth. You can make that point for literally every single Straw Hat. He either saves them or he saves the place they are from. Now, Blackbeard, on the other hand, we don't know too much how he got to meet his original crew, but the second part of his crew that he got during the big raid on down was basically, hey, I'm really strong, I want to take over the world. Do you want to join me? And a lot of the pirates who are with Blackbeard are more there for a purpose, right? They're kind of seeing themselves having the best chances of getting powerful, working under Teach. It's not necessarily because they believe so much in him or his ideals or anything. It's more, this is convenient for me to support him, and as long as he's the strongest guy around, I guess I'll follow his orders. And I do actually think that that does, sound a lot closer to what Rox was doing too, right? Like, we have been told that the Rox crew in itself was more like a alliance of convenience. We had all these different interests, and people only just kind of followed Rox because it was beneficial to them. They didn't really feel any alliance towards each other, and it was just kind of this assembly of powerful pirates that would break apart, if Rox sneezed a little bit in the wrong direction, basically, right? But while I do think that you can absolutely make that argument, on the other hand, we have seen some very close interactions between many of the Rox members too. I mean, First off, Whitebeard from the beginning kind of felt like an odd one out here, right? He was the quote-unquote other good emperor next to Shanks, at least during pre-timeskip was like the vibe that we were getting. We do know that Whitebeard's entire thing was family, building, you know, a crew of people that he could trust and be close to, protect people. He was kind of the person, you know, keeping the peace and keeping the world in balance after Roger died, waiting for the right person to come and then, you know, help in the end the new Joy Boy or the new Luffy to find his way to Laugh Tale. He found out it was Luffy, but I think he was kind of hoping it would be Ace. You know, once he saw Luffy, he knew what was up there, and he realized it was now time for the next Joy Boy to actually have a chance and change the world, save the world from the evil world government. So Whitebeard being on that crew and being with Rocks, by the way, when we first meet him on Elbaf, before they even ever were a pirate crew, but just this kind of gang of strong people, is a really weird thing. I do get the vibe that Whitebeard was pretty much the Zorro of the Rocks crew, right? Like the vice captain role, the second in command. And having someone like Whitebeard, who is this fairly idealistic, pure, good-hearted character, be the second in command of this so-called ruthless band of vagabonds, seems a little bit off to me. Not sure if you'd agree with that. Then, of course, we have Big Mom and Kaido, who, yes, are the two quote-unquote bad Yonko. They are the main antagonists of two of the big One Piece arcs after the time skipping of the Yonko saga with Whole Cake Island, and then in Wano, we have both of them forming an alliance, teaming up. But even with Kaido and Big Mom, they are two characters that we see a lot of nuance for throughout their own character arcs. Big Mom, we learn, wants to create a utopia. She's this very wholesome, loving, caring, happy kid that then has a lot of tragic things happen to her. She gets abandoned by her family. She eats all her friends and her mentor, who was kind of human trafficking her and the other orphans on Elbaf. Very shady thing. I think we're gonna still hear more about the entire Mother Caramel arc in Elbaf. This is not resolved for me at all. And then, of course, she joins Rocks, she starts building her own family, and we do know that her ultimate goal is to create this utopia where all the races can live together and, you know, everyone can live in peace. She just does it the wrong way. Same thing for Kaido, right? Kaido is introduced as this guy who's ruling in tyranny over Wano. He's exploiting the country. He has this underworld network that ranges from Punk Hazard to Dressrosa to Wano. Initially, we get this idea that he wants to build this giant crew that wants to take down the entire world and make the final war and whatnot, and just, you know, find strong people to fight and bring destruction. But the more we learn about Kaido during Wano, but especially after Wano also, we then get to see that he saves King. And it does seem like Kaido is the one person who knew the most about Joy Boy and what happened in the past. There's a lot of interesting parallels and reasons why he probably went to Wano, right? We do know that Shiki, for example, was from Wano, it seems like, in Rox's crew. We now know that Wano harbors one of the ancient weapons. It was the place where the Kozuki clan made the poneglyphs. Kaido talks about Joy Boy all the time. He's very disappointed at first that Luffy can't be Joy Boy, and then is ecstatic that Luffy actually awakens Gear 5th with all the new nuances that we've been getting, seeing Kaido as like a cabin boy or a young lad, you know, being part of the Rocks crew. It does seem to me that Kaido, just like Big Mom, hoped they could be the next Joy Boy, defeat Imu and the world government, and bring the new dawn. And again, both of them did it in like a bad way, right? Big Mom by kind of like forcing her family to fight for her, like almost breeding this Joy Boy-esque army as we see on the mural. We have all these different races, and then obviously having those hunger streaks, eating people and taking the souls of people away to keep them safe. She goes down a bad route for it, but clearly with a, you know, noble goal in mind. Doing the wrong thing for the right reason, that is correct. And same for Kaido, right? We do know that originally he probably thought that he could be the next Joy Boy, and then he kind of got disillusioned by that and thought that at least fighting the strongest people he could find and starting the final war, he could then birth the next Joy Boy and thus bring about a change to the world. Both Big Mom and Kaido were experimenting with the numbers, which we now have a feeling are probably very relevant, like ancient giants are very, very relevant for being Joy Boy, as we see in the mural, but also now with the Galela connections we got on Elbaf. The same reason why Rocks also, we now know, actually set up camp on Elbaf and was very interested in recruiting Harold, and then obviously the entire connection with Loki that we'll get into as well. And it doesn't just stop with the original three, Yonko, Whitebeard, Blackbeard, Kaido. A lot of the other characters that we see, they all are in this like interesting between good and bad. Like, take Stussy, for example. She joined Mads, but wasn't actually a real scientist. She just stole science from other people for money or her own gains. But nonetheless, her clone is a really good person who's allies with Vegapunk. She helps the Straw Hats, and because she is the clone of the real Stussy, we can kind of assume, I think, that was part of her personality too. Plus, we get the entire Weevil arc, which, yes, again, very weird, but she very clearly cares for her son. It is just so fascinating that we have all these characters who are made out to be evil people and definitely have done very bad things, but also have this good core. You know what I mean? I mean, Shiki is the same way. He is technically a villain. He's the villain of Strong World, one of the One Piece movies, where he kidnapped Nami. He is obviously Roger's big enemy as well, one of his biggest rivals. We see him fight against Garp. But also Shiki, we do know, has very strong ideals, has strong and noble goals that he wants to fulfill, again, in the wrong way, you know, with his big army. He wants Roger to join him and, you know, build something together. Presumably, I would suspect that Shiki had the same goal as Big Mom and Kaido, that he learned from Rocks about the true history, what needs to be done. He knew that Rocks probably wanted to change the world too in some way, shape or form. We will get to that. And, you know, did it in the wrong way. And the list keeps going. I mean, Gloriosa, we do know, is not a bad person. She's taking care of the sisters when they come back from being slaves in Marijua, takes care of Boa Hancock, advises her, you know, and is a big reason why she kind of is able to keep it together when she falls in love with Luffy and then ends up helping Luffy. And then there are a lot of other really interesting characters on Rocks' crew, like Ochoko, for example, right? Who then, after Rocks passes away, makes sure that his island, Pirate Island, is safe, and it's Blackbeard, out of all people, who then swoops in, defeats him, and takes over the island himself, probably going against Rocks' own will, while I would assume that Ochoko was there to make sure that the island was protected. And so my point here is that Rocks' crew, to me, just does not quite represent this, oh, we're all in here for our own gains and we don't care about each other, and just, you know, once Rocks is defeated, we're all gonna disband and do our own thing. That's not the vibe I get at all. We have a whole group of flawed characters, but with a lot of good sides in them as well. Gloriosa, Whitebeard, etc., etc. Some of these people got corrupted or grew up in like very rough circumstances, made bad decisions, but some of them do care about each other. They do have interesting relationships, and all of them did learn a lot of important things from Rocks, which even catapulted them into the positions that they were in the actual story when then Luffy set sail, right? Becoming the Yonko. In Shiki's case, you know, who knows what he's up to. And so in a very weird way, for me, Rocks almost is this weird middle ground between Blackbeard and Luffy, where he kind of embodies both of their philosophies in an interesting way. I do think he kind of does have that Joy Boy-esque vibe, where he was, you know, finding strong people. You know, I do very much think that he had close bonds with a lot of his crewmates. He did care about people, and I do even suspect that Rocks might have had a more noble goal in mind. He wanted to take down Imu and knew a lot more about the past and about, you know, the Void Century and the murals and whatnot than we all originally thought. But at the same time, he also has these Blackbeard elements, where he is clearly looking for the strongest people. He's using backfights to get the best people on his crew, and uses the best of both worlds from Blackbeard and Luffy to build his own crew. And I think the fact that he is almost in the middle between these two most important characters, arguably, in all of One Piece, makes him so special and kind of makes him such an interesting character for me when he finally gets now the spotlight, because it could go in either direction, right? We could see a world where Rocks ends up actually being that very bad guy like Blackbeard, who just wanted to defeat Emu to take their spot and be the new evil ruler of the world. Rocks could also want to take down Emu to free the world, have a similar dream like Luffy did, and, you know, like Roger did, and inspire potentially even Roger, and be this dramatic character that failed, that now Luffy has to take up his mantle. And the fact that Rocks lives in limbo between these two important characters who are so similar but also so different makes me so excited to talk about him, and has gotten me so excited about Elbaf as a whole. I was not expecting it to go in that direction at all. But with that being addressed, how I think that, you know, Rocks places in between Luffy and Blackbeard, I now want to get to part 2. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is Rocks' relationship with Loki, because this is one of the most interesting and relevant parts of the Elbaf arc right now, because everything we just learned about Rocks takes place in Loki's flashback, like kind of got a Rock's flashback within Loki's flashback. So Oda is tying these two characters incredibly closely together. It's very relevant, clearly, for what's gonna happen with Loki and Luffy next, and in general what Loki's big role in the story will be. And so I do want to address a lot of the very interesting things that are going on here. Is that Oda seems to be drawing a strong parallel between the relationship between Luffy and Shanks and Loki and Rox, right? We do know how Luffy got to meet Shanks as a kid, how he wanted to join his crew. Shanks said no, but then he did inspire Luffy basically to become the person who he is today, to start his adventure, to build a crew, to become a great pirate. And it does seem like the very same thing was true between Loki and Rox. I mean, first interesting thing is we get two instances of these two characters interacting. The first instance is after Loki tries to jump into the underworld, survives Kaido style, which, by the way, in itself, an insanely brutal panel and sequence that we get there. Rox is not as warm as Shanks, but he does very clearly seem to care for Loki, right? He's kind of worried that he tried to do it, talks to Loki. The second time that we get to see them interact is Loki already being very inspired and asking him to join his crew, as a result of which he gets stabbed by Rox. We know that Rox was stationed on Elbaf before he took over Hachinosu, or Beehive Island, or Pirate Island. It has so many names. We realize that Loki starts admiring Rox for his worldview, or maybe more specifically for expanding his worldview, because Rox very clearly forms this relationship, friendship, I would argue, with his father. Harold, by the way, once again, kind of like the other characters, this gray character where he starts off as kind of this classic wild giant, but then turns into a genuinely good king who cares for Loki, despite Loki being hated by so many people. He tries to change Elbaf, make it better, and he has this very interesting friendship with Rox, where Rox really wants Harold to join his crew, asks him all the time. Harold says no, and then the other way around, Loki wants to join Rox, but Rox says no, and then stabs him. Now, originally, we were all led to believe that this was Rox just being heartless and like a bad person, but the more we see of their relationship and the friendship between him and Harold, it very clearly shows that Rox cared for Loki, and kind of how Shanks didn't want to put Luffy in danger with everything that was going on in his life, because he was now, as we know, on a mission to do all these things for Roger and his own plan. He couldn't take Luffy with him. Similarly, I think Rox already knew he was working towards fighting Emu, fighting the government, the God Valley incident, and so on and so forth, and he probably didn't want to take Loki with him. I mean, he made sure that Loki would get medical attention after, jumping down, and again, I think that was his way of being like, no, stop, you can't join, you can't come. And the fact also that Loki still admired Rox despite being stabbed, to me also, says that it was not exactly like he tried to kill me. I think Rox was very much aware that just like Harold, Loki was just, or like Kaido, by the way, Loki was basically almost unkillable, like this freak of nature. Now, I do want to take this relationship between Rox and Loki and like the crazy admiration Loki had for Rox, like telling him there's so much more to the world. You don't have to stay in Elbaf. You can go out, experience the world, do your own thing. I do want to take all that and bring it into the current timeline with Luffy, because we obviously know that Rox's death seemed to make Loki incredibly sad. He was like devastated, right? When the Rox crew was defeated. He idealized the man, very similar again how Luffy idealizes Shanks and sees him as like the ultimate role model. Now, as we'll see throughout this video, a very big theme with Rox is that he apparently is the original source for a lot of the big players in One Piece, where they got their original knowledge about Joy Boy, about Nika, about the Void Century, the One Piece, Laugh Tale even. A lot of characters, if not all characters in the story, originally got their knowledge from Rox. Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, potentially even Roger. We'll get to God Valley later. In the context of Loki, I think it's very reasonable to ask the question, the entire sun god thing that he has going on, right? Of him believing that he's the sun god, he needs to bring Ragnarok, bring the new dawn. He probably heard about that from Rox, I think, right? This idea that he is the one who's gonna bring change, that he got that idea not from his father or from anywhere else, but from the person he admired so much. Which, by the way, is another parallel to the Shanks-Luffy dynamic, because Shanks didn't bring Luffy with him despite despite knowing that Luffy would become Joy Boy, or had the potential to become Joy Boy after eating the Nika fruit. And so it could be very similar that if Rocks truly believed that Loki might become the next sun god, that he didn't want to take him with him, but like have him develop on his own and do his own thing. Isn't it kind of interesting that Shanks was the one who captured Loki and restrained him? It could be obviously because Loki went a little bit wild out there. I don't doubt that happened, but I'm also kind of wondering now, if Shanks wanted Luffy to become the next Joy Boy, did he restrain Loki because he didn't want Loki to try and become the next sun god? Was capturing and restraining Loki to help Luffy become who he needed to be, or maybe just restrain Loki and keep him from doing anything stupid until he could meet Luffy? If Shanks never wanted Luffy and Loki to meet because they would be clashing as sun gods, he would have probably stopped it or tried to stop it. But the fact that he didn't kind of tells me that maybe he kind of wanted to just take Loki, be like, you can't start destroying the world or do anything stupid before Luffy's ready, parked him in Elbaf, tied him up, and made sure that they would meet. And now he's maybe okay with Loki being free now that Luffy is there and they can work together, or whatever their interesting connection is as the two sun gods right now. Another really interesting thing I noticed was that very clearly Loki was absolutely devastated once the Rocks crew was destroyed and Rocks, allegedly killed, but he also talks about his own admiration for Rocks in the past tense when he talks to Luffy about it, right? Which could mean nothing. It could just be Rocks is dead now and I used to admire that person when he was alive, right? But I'm also kind of wondering if Loki changed his mind, like that he genuinely used to, admire Rocks, but now doesn't anymore. And I think the nuance there, what it's going to be, is also going to be very important for his character arc going forward. I'm very curious to see which direction Oda actually takes us in. But again, I think Loki, another fantastic example of how Rocks has his fingers everywhere. Even people like Shanks, like Loki, where like everywhere Luffy goes, Rocks almost ties into everything. Now we're gonna get into the really interesting parts of Rocks' character and his writing and why I love him so much, which is all the crazy mystery and speculation that we have around his powers. Now you may or may not be aware that how strong Rocks is has been a big point of discussion and debate in the One Piece community for years now, with a lot of people speculating that could Rocks just be a fraud, right? Like he had all these incredibly powerful people around him, kind of like Buggy, which we'll get into his relationship with Buggy later on, but we can already bring up, it's interesting to have the parallel here, where Buggy also is a character who presumably is very weak, but has somehow managed to, coax all these powerful people around him to follow into his command. And I think the fact that for a long time we never really got any proof of what Rocks really looked like and what his potential powers could have been, it was a very interesting idea that he might just be a very weak character who used the Davy Backfight rules to, in a very sneaky way, get these incredibly broken characters and fighters in his crew, and that way even was able to, build this ultimate crew that was so powerful, but he himself was not all that impressive. And even though I do think that that does kind of tie a very fun parallel to Buggy, which again, we'll get into the part where he might be Buggy's father as well, that Buggy might be Black half-brother, I just don't think that the fraud allegations do hold up for Rocks' character, because with everything we've been getting, it just screams that this man was genuinely a very powerful fighter. Not confirmed yet, because we do kind of still not know what his real powers are, but we're gonna speculate, and it does seem to me like there was a real big amount of power backing up him being the captain of this crazy crew. Now, the only real piece of action that we get for Rocks so far in the story is when he first comes to Elbaf looking for Harold. It seems like he's the person who just slices off the entire top of a mountain, casually walking through, like the peace thing. Now, I personally have speculated about this, but let's just get into it, right? It does seem to be implied that Rocks is the person who slices off this top. We do know that he's a swordsman. We've heard about this for a while, but not just that he's a very unique and strange swordsman, which Oda has not elaborated on, but I'm kind of curious what that means. So, what then could Rocks' powers be? Like, I would for one assume that he has all three types of haki. I think you do need armament and just observation haki not on purpose, armament and observation haki to survive in the new world, to even play the game there. So I think that's a given. And who in the world gets more conqueror-ish than Rocks, who literally rocks up to Emu's place, who causes havoc in the Reverie and in the Holy Land by himself, casually, taking on an admiral and whatnot. And there I go forgetting that he quite literally had a Conqueror's Haki clash with Herald in the Reverie. Very much confirmed. We can say that he had all 3 types of Haki, probably very advanced. We get quite literally the Conqueror Haki, sky splitting, their swords not even touching type of vibe, which just one of the coolest panels, by the way, one of the recent chapters, and there have been a lot of really cold and cool panels. But next to just Haki, the question there is, of course, did Rocks kind of go more in the Roger Shanks category, where he didn't have a devil fruit, he was just pure, strong swordsman, crazy Haki, or was he more in the Luffy, Blackbeard category, where he had an actual devil fruit on top of things? I would not hate it if he didn't have a devil fruit, but I also think that it would be a lot more fun if he did. And what are some of the fun options? I personally think that one option that I would love to be true is that Rocks might have been the original user of the Chop Chop fruit. In that panel where he chops off the mountaintop, he does the scissor sign, which could just be him asking the 2 questions that he has to Loki, yes, but it could also be Oda tricking us and actually this being relevant to it, him actually having these scissor choppy powers, right? Buggy, again, who's already implicated to be so close to Rocks by his face just looking almost the same as Rox's. We did this panel here a while ago when his face got first revealed, and you can very much see if you mirror the first half of Rox's face, it looks like Blackbeard. If you mirror the other side of his face, it looks like Buggy. They look similar to the same degree, only that Blackbeard is the only one we actually got confirmation for that Rocks is his father. So Buggy actually having eaten the devil fruit of his dad without knowing about it would be very cool, and it wouldn't make sense that Roger might have the Chop Chop fruit on board, especially after, God Valley and all those things. And the Chop Chop fruit, when they talk about it in one of the first 5 chapters of One Piece, we get that little flashback between Shanks and Buggy. Shanks even says that this is worth at least 100 million berries, which is a very big amount. We do know that not all devil fruits would have that crazy amount of bounty on them from the government. And of course, there has been a lot of speculation that the Chop Chop fruit might be a lot more powerful than it seems, that Buggy's just not using it right, that it might not even be a regular paramecia. That's been a theory that's been floating around there, but it could definitely be a fun option and explain the slicing thing even without the sword. Then, of course, another option would be the Ope Ope no Mi. That one just makes a lot of sense. In many regards, it has the slicing powers, it has the entire, one being maybe potentially one of the most broken fruits in the entire story with all the crazy abilities that it has, but it also is interesting, when we later gonna talk about the idea that Rocks might still be alive, because of course, as we know, both has the immortality surgery, but also the ability to swap personalities, which could open up the possibility that maybe Rocks switched his personality with, I don't know, his son Blackbeard or someone else before his body actually got killed on God Valley, potentially. So I think that's really interesting, and it also ties interestingly in with the entire Doflamingo thing, where he really wanted the fruit because he thought it was the perfect fruit to infiltrate and get the secret treasure. So maybe Doflamingo was also inspired by Rocks and how he infiltrated the Holy Land. I would have to look up if the timelines match up, but it could be that maybe a young Doflamingo remembers Rocks entering the Holy Land and, everyone being like, how did he get in here? And finding out that he had the Ope Ope no Mi, and he was like, oh, well, now that I want to get back into Marijua, I'm just gonna have to get the exactly same fruit. And then, of course, there are 3 other fruits which are all in their own respect interesting if Rocks had them. The first being the Quake fruit. We do not know if Whitebeard already had it when he joined Rocks, if he got it on God Valley, or in this option, he would have gotten it after Rocks died, kind of carrying on the will or the devil fruit of his captain being the vice captain. Of course, it also ties in nicely with Blackbeard really wanting the Quake fruit for himself. Of course, know that Blackbeard was very much inspired by Rocks for his own plans to take over the world, and so if he felt like the Quake fruit was so essential, that could be because not only did Whitebeard have it, but his dad had it too. But But maybe the better argument for that could also be his first devil fruit, the darkness fruit, which was the key part of his plan that he needed to get his hands on before he could start any other part, you know, gathering a crew, leaving the Whitebeard pirates, trying to become a warlord, trying to become a Yonko, etc, etc. And the darkness fruit being Rox's original power would make a lot of sense in a lot of ways, not only with Blackbeard, but also that it's known as the ultimate Logia fruit, and also the fact that Rox's Jolly Roger has the weird, you know, flamey kind of gassy thing going on, which would make sense with the darkness fruit. But what's the other fruit that would make sense here? Exactly, Luffy's Sun God Nika fruit, which has, funnily enough, the exact same swirls in his hair. And if Rox had the Nika fruit, would Oda have been cooking? Now, we do know that Luffy was the first person to properly awaken the Nika fruit and become Joy Boy in 800 years, but it's absolutely not impossible that other people had eaten the fruit before and were just never able to become Joy Boy and awaken its full potential. If this were the case and Rox had eaten the Nika fruit, it might hint at the idea that Blackbeard mistook the fruits, and he was actually looking for the Nika fruit but thought it was the darkness fruit because the darkness and the Nika fruit look insanely similar. They're very similar. Now, this could be because both of them might be special fruits, and maybe the darkness fruit is not a regular Logia fruit, right? It's an old theory, but some other god fruit or some other special fruit. Or it could simply be that they look similar. Blackbeard thought that that's the fruit that Rox wanted or Rox had and was just kind of wrong about it. I personally think all of these options would be incredibly fire for Rox, but it could also be some other things that he's got going on. I think Rox, for example, is a peak candidate for being someone who has the voice of all things, because we kind of know that he was the first person to truly learn about the true history. Like, he somehow knew about it. He might have been the person who told Roger about it to begin with, but as far as we know, he didn't have anyone on his crew who could read the poneglyphs, and him being able to, you know, understand them with the voice of all things would make a lot of sense. He is a D-Clan member, right? He is, you know, again, the progenitor of so much of the knowledge and all the other Yonko that have been trying to go for the One Piece, so I think it would make a lot of sense for him to have had this power. We'll have to wait and see. We could also speculate, does he have some ties to the Abyss powers that, you know, Imu and the Gorosei and the Holy Knights use? I'd say probably not, but it is interesting that he says he's an admirer of Davy Jones. We'll get into that in, you know, the next chapter, but it could mean that if Davy Jones is potentially related to Imu's powers, you know, the Abyss being literally the bottom of the ocean abyss, that's Davy Jones's locker, etc, etc. If those were connected, I think you could make an argument that maybe he has some abyss powers, but I feel like there's like literally no evidence for that right now. I am convinced that Rox might very well have been one of the strongest pirates or characters in general to be in the One Piece world ever, needing Roger and Garp teaming up quite literally to take him down, not including even his crew. I would love that, and I can absolutely see that with everything we've gotten recently, but it's still very interesting to ask the question, why did he still know that he was not strong enough to defeat Imu? Because if it takes the likes of Garp and Roger to take him down in a combined effort, and who knows, maybe even some other characters chiming in there, like, what does it say about Imu if Rox was very much aware that he could do nothing against them? It either says that Imu is so beyond comprehensibly broken that strongest pirate of the last 800 years could do nothing, or it just means that Imu can't be destroyed or fought with regular powers. Either of these would not, you know, bode very well for Luffy, because if, you know, Imu is that powerful that even someone like Rox could not defeat them, that would be bad. But it kind of doesn't feel that way, because then why would Imu let them go and not do anything? So the second option seems more likely, where Imu's powers are tied to something so abstract that regular strength or, you know, attacks just don't do anything against them. Now, we might potentially learn something about that once Luffy and Loki go up to fight Imu, but maybe not, because don't forget, like, Imu is there through Gunko, channeling themselves through Gunko, and I do feel like kind of remote Jedi projecting yourself from Arijua probably takes a toll on your power, so I would assume that even though Imu is very clearly very broken, might not be at 100% here in Elbaf, but maybe 20%. 10%, I don't know, 50, not full power, I think. Also, very quickly, before we move on to the next point, I very quickly wanted to say thank you to all of you guys who have been recently signing up on Patreon. Now, in case you don't know, on Patreon, we post a bunch of bonus content for you guys, behind the scenes videos, early chapter reactions, unfiltered thoughts, artwork that we have on the thumbnail, so you can use that too. There's a lot of stuff there we do, and it's been really fun seeing that community grow, and it's been a lot of fun creating for you over there too. Now, your support support there really helps us do what we do here, create all the fantastic artwork, you know, all the chibis you see here and our thumbnails. Obviously, I have a lot of really talented people and artists on the team that make this work, and your support allows me to do that. So if you want to support the channel and get a bunch of really cool perks, you can check out Patreon over there. And we also have some free content for you too, like a weekly One Piece newsletter where we talk about the manga, the anime, the live action news, anything else that Oda has been up to, right? Like recently there was the big baseball collaboration with the LA Dodgers, all that stuff. It's free. If you don't have money or you don't want to support the channel, you can still get something over there. So check it out in the link in the description. And yeah, let's get to the next section of the video. Now, the entire interaction that we have between Rox and Emu, which, by the way, absolutely, peak fiction by itself. Rox just sitting there with his gun in the flower room, sneaking in, and them just, like, pinging stuff between them. It's just so cold. What a crazy character, right? But it kind of also obviously brings us to the question, what actually is Rox's motive? Or even his motives, if he has multiple ones, right? Now, the very obvious one that we always are being told about, especially by the world government, which is the fact that Rox wants to take over the entire world, rule over the One Piece planet, right? Is this true or is it not true? For now, we just straight up do not know. I personally, if you ask me, have a suspicion that kind of how Luffy wants to become Pirate King to fulfill his real dream, I think there's a good chance that Rox just wanted to take down Emu and become the ruler of the world for some other ulterior motive. I think it would be almost a little bit boring if Rox just straight up wanted to rule the world. I'll become the new Emu and everyone will have to, you know, listen to what I say, and I'm just gonna eat, I don't know, meat every day and drink beer every day. Kind of boring, generic, and does not strike me exactly as something that Oda would do. So, not saying that Rox is straight up this good guy who wanted to save everyone and basically be Luffy but failed. Not necessarily saying that, I just think there is more to the story overall than just that. So why else then would he want to take over the world and topple Emu? Well, I mean, a few good reasons could straight up be get rid of the Marines and kind of create this pirate paradise. If it's not Rox, maybe Blackbeard, I do have a feeling that someone in the story who's trying to become Pirate King, their goal, less so than ruling over everyone, is more so creating this almost anarchist society where it's all pirates, everyone does what they want, the rule of the stronger, no government and no Marines who interfere and subjugate people. That could very much be what Rox is after. He kind of has that vibe, right? He definitely feels like strength is important to him, but also freedom to a certain extent. On the other hand, a counter argument here would be that Rox has all these very strange like his entire origin, which we will get to in the next chapter, the fact that he has so much knowledge and is aware of things that no one else knows, the fact that he not only can he invade Marijo, but he knows about the flower room, he knows about Emu. He doesn't go in there and is like, oh, who are you? What is this room? No. He goes to the flower room knowing where it is, knowing what it is, and knowing that Emu is there and who Emu is. That is absolutely insane to me. He also does seem to have some very personal beef with Emu as he gets so angry, right? Which I think is very interesting. I kind of wonder if they have history together without Emu even realizing potentially that they do. But that is one thing. He doesn't come across as someone who's just purely impulse driven. Like Luffy, for example, is smart in his own right. He has like good social intelligence and everything, but he's not exactly a strong idealist. He's not the person who has like greater dream that we still don't know about, which is why he wants to become Pirate King, but he's much more a live in the moment, do good, have fun type of person, I think you would argue, right? Rox, on the other hand, as much as he does give Luffy Blackbeard energy to a certain degree, he's much more calculated. I think it's easy to mistake him for someone who's just dull and stupid, but very clearly, no. He knows what he's doing. He has old, forbidden knowledge about the One Piece world. So, again, I do feel like there is more to why he wants to take over the entire One Piece world. And it kind of plays into another thing, which is the entire Davy Jones aspect that he dropped out of nowhere, name dropping Davy Jones for the first time in the story. So we know we have Davy Jones' locker. It does seem to me like Davy Jones is a name almost like Nika, like a name of legend, of history that Rox legitimately worships. That's the Japanese that he uses in the story. It is worship as in an idol, a god. Not only was Rox themselves this mysterious character, this hidden legend, who we now find out more and more was the inspiration and origin point for so many of the important characters in the story that Oda hinted at for so long, but now he drops another crazy character name that, at some point we're gonna have to learn more about. It's almost as if Oda said, well, since I'm giving you a little bit about rocks, I'm just gonna drop a whole different character in with Davy Jones now, who you can now start speculating about almost the same way we all did about rocks. Now, I personally have made a video about this before, and I kind of like the idea that Davy Jones might very well be one of the 4 gods. So kind of like how Nika is the sun god or was the sun god, there might very well have been a Davy Jones who might have been the ocean god or the forest god, who knows? I go into more detail in that video when it comes out 2 days from now, I think. Basically, we all, just by that fact alone, that Rox is the first person to ever even mention the name Davy Jones, who we know from pirate lore is one of the most piratey pieces of lore and legend that are out there. The fact that he mentions that explicitly to no one else than Emu is insane to me. Now, could it be that Davy Jones is Emu? I've seen some people speculate that. I think it could be, but it doesn't really make sense. That would basically be Rox saying to Emu, I'm a big admirer of you, but also I'll come back. It would be weird. It seems very threatening. The Rox vibe is, I'll take you down. I might not be able to defeat you right now. I'll be back for you, with backup or a better plan and take you out. So Davy Jones to me either is one of the 4 original gods, and we kind of see that not only does the sun god have a lot of influence in the One Piece world, but maybe also the ocean god, the earth god, the forest god, that all 4 of them are equally important. It could also be that Emu is drawing their power from Davy Jones. If you've watched Pirates of the Caribbean, which is the most iconic depiction of Davy Jones, obviously, there's the character of Tia Dalma, right? She is the one who brings Barbossa back to life, brings Jack back to life by them going to the underworld and whatnot. And we find out at some point in the story that she is actually the god of the ocean that was tied to a mortal body to appease the oceans, right? And make it sailable for sailors and pirates. I could imagine a very similar thing where in this case, Davy Jones is maybe the ocean god and got, captured or appeased or, just bound somewhere by Emu, and Emu is now drawing on Davy Jones's power, and Rox knows that that's true. Rox worships Davy Jones, and his plan might just straight up be freeing Davy Jones from the grasps of Emu, which is why he wants to, take down the world government and become the king just so he can free his own god, right? That would be a very cool option. The next piece of the entire motive puzzle that we get is Hachinosu, which always seemed like a random place. Blackbeard went there, made it his thing. Slowly over time, as with so many things, which again, all tie into Rox and makes Oda just such a great writer, and which is why I love Rox so much. Hachinosu, being Rox's base, has become more and more important and more relevant as, we start learning about things. It was the place of the Rocky Port incident, where Blackbeard, Kobe, and I'm trying to think, who am I missing? Law. They took down Ochoku. Blackbeard properly became a Yonko. Kobe became the hero of the Marines, right? And Law became a warlord by collecting all the hearts of the pirates there. Now, by itself, we talked about it earlier, it's already very fascinating that Blackbeard took out a former Rox pirate to get this island back. I do wonder if he acted against or within the interest of Rox there. Hachinosu also is very unique in a lot of ways. Hachinosu means Beehive Island, which is kind of interesting. It's also the term for riddling someone with bullets. That fits as well. It is a giant skull, which is already interesting by itself, and apparently was that way before Rox came there, right? It is really huge also because we see that Thriller Bark, which is a whole island by itself, is tiny compared to Beehive Island, so it's a massive place. And then we also know that the Davy Back fights kind of originated from there. That goes back to Rox doing his Davy Back fights there, or do the Davy Back fights go even further back in time than just Rox, and that's part of the reason Rox really wanted that island. We also learned from the narrator that this was a place where a lot of the kingdoms would dump prisoners that they didn't want to keep on their own islands, and they would just kind of rot away there until they found out that they're sitting on a bunch of gold, and some of the underworld and criminal organizations started building, structures there and turned everything into almost a pirate or criminal society, and Rox comes in there and takes over the place, and that's kind of where, he really solidifies his power. But it does feel like something about this place was really crucial to his plan and now feels incredibly crucial to Blackbeard for Blackbeard's plan, right? Whether it is all the gold there and they need it for something, whether that's paying for stuff or using gold for transmutation, right? Or if there is something else about Hachinosu or hidden underneath Hachinosu, I don't know, I'm thinking like Pluton, right, that was hidden in Wano, that could be a big reason. We do know that the Marines or the Holy Knights came in to steal the treasure of Hachinosu, whatever that is, and Rox went to God Valley, in part at least, to get that treasure back. We don't know if they came in before Rox took over the island or while he was already there, but something is very important here. I can't wait to find out what it is. And then, of course, we also have to address the Davy backfights again a little bit. Why was that such a big part of his plan? And that's, I think, a very important question in a lot of ways. Like, couldn't he just actually have found people who believe in him, like, both for Luffy and for Blackbeard? Like, I mean, for Luffy, it's people actually trust and love Luffy. For Blackbeard, they trust in his strength and stuff. Why did Blackbeard specifically use Davy backfights? Was it that he couldn't get the people otherwise, which doesn't really seem to be the case based on what we've seen? Could be true though. Or it could be that there is something about the Davy backfight, that there is something genuinely binding, the way that it binds someone to your crew, that makes it almost unbreakable. Like, I kind of wonder, we do get this on Long Ring Long Island, where both Sanji and Robin, I think, say to Luffy, hey, you have to do it, like it's holy, it's like a pact. It sounds almost like it could be more than just tradition, like it's bad practice, bad pirate practice not to do a Davy backfight. It almost feels like there's this sort of mythical pact that if you break it, something bad happens or you die, or right? And you have to accept a Davy backfight, and then if you lose, you have to join the other person's crew. So I kind of wonder if, you know, Rox built his crew that way so that he would have crew members that were quite literally bound to his cause, which would make sense since he is an admirer of Davy Jones. So if he knows more about Davy Jones being this god or this powerful creature that, you know, lends their name to this type of competition, that could be the reason. But since we've now talked a lot about Rox and Luffy, Rox and Blackbeard, and I've already teased a little bit the Buggy connection, let's actually spend a little bit of time diving a little bit deeper into this. Teach is pretty much confirmed. Rox not only gets introduced with a face that looks like Blackbeard, we do get the box telling us he is Blackbeard's father, not some crazy cloning shenanigans going on or whatnot. The question here, of course, is how does this impact the story overall? It was pretty much clear from the beginning that Blackbeard was a massive fan of Rox and kind of is trying to step into his footsteps, right? He named his ship after Rox, the Saber of Xebec. We have him taking over Pirate Island, as we just mentioned, all these things. And it does seem like his whole plan, Blackbeard's entire plan to find the One Piece, become Pirate King, get the Darkness Fruit, get Whitebeard's, Rox's second in command's fruit, etc., etc. It feels very much like it's built on Rox's original plan, whether that means that Rox directly inspired Blackbeard and passed his own plan onto him and was like, hey, I couldn't make it, you finish the rest, or whether it was Blackbeard learning that Rox was his father, taking like the wrong lessons from it, but then trying his best to recreate that himself without actually Rox having any say in it. I think both options are quite fascinating, and it would put Rox very firmly in one or the other corner, because if he was the one who inspired Blackbeard and was like, hey, listen, here's what you gotta do. You're gonna join Whitebeard, you're gonna wait until you find the Darkness Fruit. Once you have that, you then build your own pirate crew, get the Earthquake Fruit, get all the others fruit, like, kind of like that. That would kind of, at least almost to 90%, put Rox in a more evil quote-unquote corner. While if it was more that Blackbeard learned about it all, inherited some things from his father, and then tried to reconstruct Rox's plan himself and is now executing it in a very bad way or, corrupted way, that would almost lead more credence to the idea that Rox might not be that bad a person. One way or the other, though, Blackbeard is very clearly going to be the person that once we learn more about him and his past, we are finally going to learn probably the whole story about Rox too. Like, we're now getting these little teases with Loki's backstory, kind of how we learn more and more about Kaido. Like, how we get these characters in One Piece where we learn little bits and pieces about them from little flashbacks until we get that big flashback, right? I think the same thing is gonna happen with Rox as well. We're learning a little bit now with Loki what we need for their relationship, but then we're gonna get truly the big chunk through Blackbeard. And I think similarly, with Shanks, we've been getting little bits here and there, but then in the end, it's gonna be when we get to Shanks himself where we're gonna get the whole picture, right? And more about Roger and whatnot. Or we've all been fooled, and Rocks is Blackbeard in some way, shape, or form, either switched personalities, has his soul in him, whatnot. We do know Blackbeard has a lot of weird things going on. Is that because he is Rocks' son and Rocks' body was weird and Rocks is multiple people? If it's just Blackbeard, that would speak really to the idea that Rocks' soul is somehow inside there. And obviously the most famous moment is when Luffy and Zoro leave the bar. It's not him, it's them when they talk about Blackbeard. He doesn't sleep. We get weird comments that his body is special from Marco, from Katarina Devon and Saturn. So that is a very real possibility, obviously. But even though Blackbeard is confirmed, there is a second child that is at this point almost more likely to be real than not, which is, as I already talked about in this video, Buggy. Again, look at the mirrored faces. It is insane. And even in the second chapter, after we get Rock's introduction, we get his bounty poster, which straight up is the tongue-out Buggy style wanted poster we get from Buggy. Oda could not be screaming at us louder that he wants us to make the connection here. Now, I personally would think that if Buggy is Rox's kid, that Buggy probably doesn't know about it. And also that Buggy and Blackbeard are half-brothers, not actually brothers. It would be insanely cool if Buggy was actually Rox's kid. That would make him much more relevant. It would explain also a lot better why he's now one of the Yonko, and might even hint at the idea that whether he knows it or not, he could be a lot stronger than we all think he is. And obviously what we talked about earlier would be interesting if Rox actually had some connection to the Chop Chop Fruit too. The real question though is, who would be the mothers of both Blackbeard and or Buggy? The only very likely person I can come up with at this point is Gloriosa. She makes a lot of sense. We do learn on the entire Amazon Lily arc that, you know, the empresses of that island have a tendency to fall in love with pirates, and that the only way to not die from that love is to kind of follow their heart and follow that pirate. And we do know that Boa does that with Luffy. We know that Shaki does it with Rayleigh. Best couple in One Piece, by the way. Not even close. And we do know that Gloriosa also left Amazon Lily to pursue her own, you know, love interest. And it does just make a lot of sense, I think, since she was on Rox's crew. We know that Rox was that person, like the captain would be the most interesting person, especially since we have the Luffy and Boa Hancock parallel anyways. But there is also Stussy, so who knows? And I mean, Rox feels like he would have some good pull, though I feel like Stussy was more into Whitebeard and he was kind of pulling a lot there too. So Gloriosa would be my big tip. I would say either Blackbeard or Buggy. We're gonna have to wait and see. All of this, what we've talked about so far, his kids, what his actual plan was, even his powers, honestly. What it really boils down to me is, who is Rox and where did he come from? You know, his history, which of course we know very little about, but we have a lot of very interesting questions that I do want to address here. And again, to me, that really highlights what an incredible job Oda has done building this character, and how the more we know about him, you know, the more of a mystery he becomes in a way, but absolutely fantastic. So, question number one. How did Rox even know about Imu and the Flower Room? He just strolls up there to Marijoa, as far as we know, on his own, takes a bunch of kings hostage, injures a admiral to like a deadly degree, so he passes away from his wounds at a later point, clashes with Harold, who, you know, we see is insanely strong with the ancient giant blood in its own right, effortlessly, and then just sneaks into, you know, Imu's secret garden room, threatens them, drops a bunch of lore, says, I'm gonna be back here. Neither Imu nor the person that we think is Gunko in this panel is trying to do anything to stop them, and they just, you know, then stroll out again, make a bunch more chaos on the way down, and then head over to Elbaf to reunite with Harold, basically. Insane. Like, all the feats around it are insane, but how did he know? How did he know about Imu? Someone that most people in the One Piece world have no idea exists. How did he know where the Flower Room is? He knew his way around, you know, Marijoa, which is kind of crazy in itself. Then, of course, how does he know Davy Jones? How does he know so much about the hidden history and all these things? Because very clearly, all the people that we've already talked about, and that we'll get to in the next section, by the way, too, with all the Rox crew members, but we've already talked about all the big players that were going for the One Piece, from Kaido, Big Mom, potentially even Roger, who didn't really know about anything, as far as we can tell, related to Laugh Tale or the Poneglyphs, knew about it before God Valley and clashing with rocks. Blackbeard, right? All these people seem to have known about the One Piece and the Poneglyphs and the fact that there was even a true history of the world from rocks. Whitebeard, by the way, I forgot about, of course. He as well, of course, yeah. In a lot of ways, Rocks was the original source for the big pirate era for a lot of the big players who are active right now, and the only reason why there even seems to be a chance of the Emu government being taken down and, you know, the world being freed to begin with, it all seems to somehow go back to Rocks. But that doesn't solve the question where he learned about all of this. How did he know? Why did he even care about it if he learned about it? And I sadly don't quite have the answers yet. I have some speculation that I've talked about in a previous video, like the idea that Rocks might be someone from the Void Century himself. We talked about how he has this weird, almost relationship with Emu, is very angry at them. I've always loved the idea that Toki might have sent someone else into the future from the Void Century, so that might be Rocks. He might be someone dating back and being a lot older than we all thought. I have more questions, though, that are going to be very interesting and, again, kind of highlight why I think Rocks is peak fiction. For instance, why did he want Harold so badly? Like, why did he feel like he was such a key part of his plan that he kept over and over and over inviting him, spending so much time around him, which was, of course, how Loki even came to admire Rocks so much to begin with. Was it just because Harold was a very strong, powerful person and the vibes, or did he actually want ancient giant blood? Did he want the Giants of Elbaf as part of his army, which we now know is something that all groups seem to want? We know that Rocks wanted ancient giants. We do know that Kaido was trying to make ancient giants. We do know that Big Mom was trying to forge an alliance with Elbaf. We know that now that, you know, Gunko has said, Emu feels like the Giants of Elbaf are the decisive factor. Everyone wants them. Moria had one, right? I'm not sure how much he knew, but very clearly something about Elbaf or the ancient giant blood there particularly is a very decisive factor related to something that has to do with the One Piece or the Void Century, and very clearly whoever actually has access to it at the end of the story, hopefully Luffy, will be the one to actually, you know, have the final laugh. No pun intended on Laugh Tale. But again, we have no idea where he was born, when he was born, what island he was from, right? Like, is he maybe from Laugh Tale? From Lodestar Island? Again, from somewhere else? Did he time travel? Is he part of some secret tribe that lives at the end of the Grand Line? It is very weird why he would have all that knowledge. Like, he doesn't give off the type of vibe where he was secretly an archaeologist for 40 years, just digging, finding stuff out himself. That's not exactly the vibe we get. Like, it feels like he just knows these things as if he's almost experienced them. That is a very mysterious thing about him that I absolutely love. Now, to be fair, we don't quite know if he really does know about the Poneglyphs and Laugh Tale and the Will of D, because he has never officially mentioned them yet, but he hasn't had a lot of dialogue so far too, and it does kind of feel like that was what he built his entire plan around. I mean, if he knows about Davy Jones and Emu and all that stuff, it's very unlikely, I think, that he wouldn't know about the Poneglyphs, that he wouldn't know about Laugh Tale. Again, we'll get into it more with God Valley in just a moment, but it is very suspicious. Like, this combination of character and the level of knowledge and power he has, something's up. Now, you may or may not know this from one of my videos or some other video you watched, but Rocks the Xebec is very clearly inspired by a real-life pirate who was known as Rock the Brazilian, who was a real buccaneer slash pirate from the Netherlands, I think, if I remember correctly, but who was around Brazil, you know, kind of with a similar vibe as Rocks. Like, he was known to be this crazy, brutal, powerful guy, but also subtle in a way, had plans, then suddenly vanished. No one knows what happened to him, who had like a bunch of crazy adventures and incidents, going against governments, other pirates. Like, he was very much a Rocks-like character. And of course, there's the fact that we do know that Rocks is part of the D-Clan, which always is kind of tying people into the good part, you know, of One Piece to a certain degree. Like, there is shading there again, you know, Blackbeard is a D-Clan member. I'm trying to think who's another not that great D-Clan member. Like, usually is, you know, the D's are the enemies of the gods. We do see Rocks the Xebec quite literally go up to Marijo and Emu and be the enemy of the gods. So it again puts him into this very interesting category where maybe he's not 100% good, but it's very hard not to root for him, like the way that Oda portrays him in these chapters. So, we've now already introduced a bunch of them, but I nonetheless want to take the time and very quickly walk through all the people that we do know were on the Rocks crew, because the list is quite insane to say the least, so I just wanted to quickly go through and talk about a few that we haven't talked about yet. Again, we know most people either from the flashback, from Thriller Bark, where we got to know a lot of people, and of course, people who were some of the most influential people in the One Piece world while Luffy was active too. So, Whitebeard. One of the Yonko, friends and rival to Roger, probably was there not only, from Rox's end, knew a lot what was going on with the real history in One Piece, but also from Roger's end. He kind of feels like he fit that role of managing stuff until the right person that Roger was waiting for, aka Luffy, was ready to actually challenge the world and become Joy Boy. Shiki, a character that seems very likely at this point to be from Wano. He was known as a Yakuza member. He has a Japanese name. We do see him in very Japanese clothing. He's probably still the person in this cover story right here talking to Crocus. He was also later someone who became a rival to Roger. Basically Yonko level, only that he got captured at some point. He then vanished without a trace. I absolutely hope that he will be back in the story, but another Yonko level person who was there with Rocks from the very beginning. And also tying Rocks to Wano, by the way, which is also interesting that Rocks had all these people, we have Wano, he was on Elbaf trying to recruit from there. We have all the highlights. Fishman Island, there was a fisherman there on the crew, kind of like Luffy, had like the all races approach to the crew, very much like we see in the mural with Joy Boy, just saying. Then there was Stussy, we already talked about her. We had Big Mom, we had one of Big Mom's first husbands, Stroyson, right, who was the cook fruit. Very random that he was on that crew, but kind of cool, and again, not really a bad guy, like he was probably the cook on the crew. Very cool that he was there. Then we have Gloriosa, again, as we talked about, from Amazon Lily, who is now basically mentoring and guiding Boa Hancock, very good friends with Luffy. We have Silver Axe, Captain John, two characters that we are being told were legendary in their own way, are dead and were revived by Gecko Mori on Thriller Bark. Captain John, and specifically a character I'm very curious about. He is like the most piratey pirate in One Piece, which is a pirate story where for some reason Oda doesn't love going very piratey, but Captain John has the looks, he has the booze, he's the one who made the treasure map that Buggy found, right? And Buggy was probably still is obsessed with Captain John's treasure in an interesting way, connecting Buggy to Rocks too. Then there is Wang Zi, or also known as Ochoku, who took care of Pirate Island after Rocks' demise, after the crew split up, that then got probably killed, but at the very least defeated by Blackbeard. Then there is Don Marlon, this guy here, Gil Baster, a guy that some random fan found, as like a silhouette here in Thriller Bark, and then asked if this was a character that was part of the Rocks crew, and Oda actually confirmed it in the most recent volume in an SBS right here. We also have Ganzui, who is probably the very big bulky guy on Thriller Bark. On top of that, there were probably a bunch of other members of the Rocks crew that we just don't know about yet. I would not be surprised if some other random strong characters turn actually out to be on the Rocks crew in the end too, but these are the heavy hitters and a lot of new ones that we just got to know very recently. So, with the crew introduced, we've talked about his backstory, we've talked about his objective, his power, everything. All of this, of course, accumulates in one place, God Valley, arguably the single most important event in One Piece history so far, at least in the modern era. God Valley, without a question, the single most important and impactful event that we've gotten. It is now not there anymore. It's very interesting that it's called God Valley. There is something weird about its entire geography and geology, where you have this almost mountain that looks like it's been split in half by a giant axe. I'm curious if, there is actually some real world lore behind it, knowing that the gods in One Piece are very probably real. More importantly though, this is of course the place where the Celestial Dragons and some of the Holy Knights were hosting their big hunting game, where basically they brought a bunch of slaves from Marijoa and also were hunting some of the locals, and were just like, who kills the most gets the most points. Like, if you needed a reason to think that the world government was the most despicable, evil organization in One Piece, Oda loves reminding us with little stuff like this. But let's talk about who was there. Next to Rocks, of course, and the crew that we just talked about, we had a bunch of the Holy Knights, including Figgle and Garling. We know that some of the Gorosei were there, at the very least Saturn. We do have all the slaves, a lot of them very influential, that later turned into Revolutionary Army members like Kuma and Ivankov. Ginny was there, right? Bonnie's mom. Then, of course, we had the Marines who were there too. As I said, they probably came with Garp. We had the Raja Pirates, And that kind of made the ultimate battle, the ultimate brew of characters, which really was the starting point for 80% of the important character arcs from people who were like on that island, right? It made Garp the hero of the Marines. It set Roger on the path to finding the One Piece, becoming Pirate King. For Rox, obviously, it meant the end of his crew, but so many of his, crew members turned out in important locations. 3 Yonko, one character who was almost a Yonko with Shiki, Stussy. So many of the characters who were part of his crew are still alive. Just incredibly influential. Ochoku on Pirate Island, obviously. Garp specifically becoming the hero of the Marines is like a very big thing. That kind of led into his, relationship with Roger. Them teaming up kind of was the impetus for him taking care of Ace, Roger's son, and that of course was the main influence for Luffy growing up, tying directly into Luffy's storyline through Garp's and Roger's alliance there. Now, we already touched on a few of these questions before, but the big things that we need to talk about with God Valley are obviously, why did Rox come, which was probably, at least in part, because of that, infamous treasure from Hachinosu that got taken there and that they wanted, but it might in part also have been the incredibly rare devil fruits that the Celestial Dragons had brought down as prices, including at the very least Kaido's devil fruit and the one that Kuma ate, because originally, remember, Kuma wanted to eat Kaido's dragon fruit and Big Mom was like, nah, little buddy, give that to me, right? So in part at least, Rox's crew was there to pick up some immensely powerful devil fruits. We don't know if the earthquake fruit was there, if Big Mom's fruit was there, but it is very possible because they are some of the most broken fruits in One Piece. And of course, it feels like there is still a lot that is unsaid and untold about God Valley. I am personally very convinced that Rox themselves, when they were fighting, had some sort of conversation. It feels like Roger learned a lot of the stuff that he then only after God Valley got interested in from Rox potentially, or fighting with the Rox pirates, whether that was like an actual real serious fight and it just kind of slipped out and they talked about stuff, or Roger and Rox getting along to a certain degree and Rox kind of passing on his will to Roger. It does feel very likely to me that Rox was the person who told Roger to find out about the poneglyphs, look for Laugh Tale, whatever, like gave Roger the nudge to become Pirate King and then kick off the entire story and the big pirate era as we know it today. So, with all of this now being addressed, the one big question that still remains, among many other big questions by the way, did Rox actually die as we were told he did on God Valley in that battle, or is the man still alive in some way, shape, or form? It almost feels more likely at this point, and I'm not sure if you'd agree, that Rox is actually still alive. Let's look at it. What are some options that Rox could come back? Like, if he's not straight up dead in a grave somewhere or like at the bottom of the ocean, what would be potential options for him to still be around? Easiest and maybe least interesting option is that he is one of Moria's zombies. That would at least make sense in the sense that we could talk to him, learn a little bit more about him. He could still act to a certain degree, but he would be kind of one of those zombie characters from Moria that retain a little bit of their personality and knowledge, but not too much. So not my favorite option. It would be better than him being dead, I personally think. Someone took him back from God Valley after he got defeated and got imprisoned. Now, there are some options here. It could be that Imu has imprisoned him in the Abyss or turned him into a demon with Domi Reversi, and we're gonna get Rox as like the ultimate Imu weapon at some point in the story. Also, we have seen this interesting panel that people have pointed out for years now in Impel Down, where we see this frozen person who looks a lot like Rox Xebec, frozen in ice, saying that he's preserved for a time later in history. That would be insanely cool and make a lot of sense if the government just took his body, froze it, and then put it into their most secure prison. Option number 3 is that he's just straight up somewhere in hiding and just biding his time, very much like Shiki. He could be waiting for Luffy, waiting for Blackbeard, waiting for the right moment to strike again, make his presence known. This would very much go in line with the lurking legend comment that Oda made a while ago, a few years, I think was it 2017? I don't know, like a while ago. That is very famous at this point. I personally think that Rox is just the top candidate for this person to be, right? If he's in hiding, an option could be that Rox straight up might be the man with the burn scars who's guarding the last road poneglyph on his dark ship surrounded by whirlpools. That now sounds very much like something that Rox could do, and maybe Rox's idea is just, again, as I said, wait for Luffy, wait for Blackbeard, wait for the the right person to try claim the One Piece, and he's actually the final piece in the puzzle that needs to be overcome in order to become Pirate King, find the One Piece. And so, you know, maybe him and Roger made a pact on God Valley. He got burned, got his injury. That's why maybe they thought he was dead. Very similar to Salvo, for instance, who has the burn scar, right? And then got saved by Dragon, of course. So it could be that he's just basically saying, hey, no one's getting to Laugh Tale without my approval, and I'm gonna tell you some stuff before you go there, or I'm gonna try to stop you from becoming Pirate King or whatever. Like, he definitely, as we said earlier, with his plan and intention, we don't know what he really wants, but that would be very cool if he's just the person who's on that black ship on his own, you know, guarding the Last Road Poneglyph. Or, of course, there is always the option that he is hiding either with Blackbeard or that he straight up is Blackbeard. There have been a lot of theories about this and how this could work. Multiple hearts, devil fruit shenanigans, personality switches. We know something is weird about Blackbeard's body. It's been said by Luffy and Zoro that he feels like multiple people, and that would obviously also be a very cool idea, that Rocks never went away. He's just always been around, and sometimes he can take over Blackbeard's body and do his thing. That also is very, very cool and would explain a lot of things surrounding Blackbeard, which, you know, kind of didn't really make too much sense. The way he like circles through personalities, how sometimes he's brave, sometimes he's cutthroat, sometimes, you know, he's a coward, and also why all these pirates follow him so loyally. All in all, I am absolutely smitten. I think Rocks is the best thing that has happened to One Piece in a long time, and that says something because One Piece has been cooking for many, many years now, for like always, but like Wano has been awesome, Ekid Island has been fun, Elbaf has been insane, and Rocks is just a character that has been introduced late like Emu, but is tying in so many loose ends that we got from the beginning of the story. Like, we never even realized that all these characters like Big Mom Kaido, Whitebeard, Cheeky, that they all were connected. Rocks is the person who brings all the big players together, and I love it. I think that he's gonna end up as one of the best characters in all of One Piece, absolute peak fiction. If you want to learn more about, you know, the entire Thriller Bark thing, there's a video here that I did about that. There's also this video here where I introduce and go into a lot more detail about the entire Rocks crew and who they are and what they're up to in the One Piece world, if you're interested in that. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I will move out of the way behind the video now so we can say thanks so much to all the Patreons here, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Let me know if you enjoyed this type of content, just us hanging out, no script, just rambling. It's been a lot of fun. Maybe you've listened to this to fall asleep. In that case, sleep well, and I will see you in the next video.